Good morning, everybody. It's an honour for me as President of the Irish Grassland Association to welcome you all to this, our 2021 Dairy Conference. We're very conscious in the Council of the Grassland Association that we were unable to bring you the traditional Dairy Conference event that would have took place on this date in an ordinary year due to the COVID restrictions. We're very aware that the social aspect of the conference was a very important part of the experience of the whole event, but we still wanted to recognise that at this time of the year, it's a great opportunity that many of you would have taken in the past to have a chance to think about the farm for the year ahead, take on board some technical messages and set about some plans on how to go about the work for the year ahead. Before I get into the detail of today's conference, there's a few thank yous that I want to say. I want to thank Brian Hines, the chairman of our Dairy Conference subcommittee, and he's ably supported by all of that committee, including the chairman, Vinnie Griffith. I want to thank the wider Irish Grassland Association Council for all their support in the background, not just on this event, but all of the activities of the Grassland Association throughout the year. And also to thank Maura Callery, who worked so hard in the background for the association to keep everything running. I also want to thank you, the members, who have continued to support the Irish Grassland Association through the events during this COVID crisis, and particularly with your participation and attendance and interest in today's event. We are recording this event in advance, and I want to thank also Teagasc Moore Park for the use of their facilities for allowing us to record the proceedings and the papers for today's event. The theme of our conference this year is Future-Proofing Irish Dairying, and we're coming at this theme from three perspectives. Given the expansion in the dairy milk pool, we want to take a global perspective, and we're delighted to have CEO of Dairygold, Jim Wolfe, who will present to us on the title, Can We Sell Our Milk? Looking ahead with future dairy markets and the confidence we can have in being able to sell our milk in the future, especially with an expanded milk pool. The second paper, which is given by Dr. Deirdre Hennessy of Teagasc Moore Park, will look at some of the challenges that are coming down the road in terms of social licence, environmental regulations, and other aspects around that we need to be very conscious of when we're farming. And she will take on in particular, she will take on the subject of potential restrictions on nitrogen fertiliser regulations that may be coming down the track, and how we should be planning now to cope with those in the future. And traditional with the Dairy Conference, our third paper is keeping with the theme of how we manage our farms in the months ahead, and particularly when we look at a word like sustainability of our farming system, coping with the everyday work on our farms is as important a part of that as anything else. And we're delighted to have Tom O'Connell, who's going to give a paper to us called Switching On for the Spring, which focuses on exactly that, particularly with the pressures that come on at different times of the year, especially with spring around calving, and some of the systems that he has successfully put into place and implemented on his farm to help him cope and manage with that. So we hope you get a lot out of those three papers and our proceedings this morning in line with the theme of future-proofing dairying. In a moment, I'll hand you to the chair of this morning's proceedings, which will be Laurence Sexton, who is a member of our Irish Grassland Council and the Dairy Subcommittee. And I'll hand you over to him to introduce our three papers and guide you through the proceedings. But before I do, my final thank you is to acknowledge that, as in every year, when we run events like this, we depend heavily on the support of our sponsors. And we're delighted again to have Yara as a conference partner for the Irish Grassland Association Dairy Conference. They've supported the conference for a number of years now, and even with the slight change in format compared to previous years, we're delighted that they are on board again to help us in the organisation and the running of this conference. And with that, before I hand you to the chair, Laurence, we'll hand you to Eva Ross of Yara, who will say a few words of introduction, and then we will proceed with the conference. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the content and the material and the presentations.
Thank you, Stan. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure for Yara to be once again sponsoring the Irish Grassland Association Dairy Conference. 2020 has been an intense year for us all in agriculture, with concerns over Brexit, COVID and emissions. At last year's conference in Charleville, I shared with you how Yara had installed catalyst abatement technology in all of our factories across Europe to reduce our nitrous oxide emissions by 90%. This year, I'm pleased to share with you plans for our Porsgrunn factory in Norway and our factory in Sluiskil in the Netherlands, where we will be converting our fossil fuel-based energy systems over to green energy in the form of hydroelectric power and wind. I believe it's important that government, industry like ourselves, farming organisations and research bodies all come together to tackle the emissions issues with long-term safe solutions. I'd like to wish the Irish Grassland Association every success in this morning's conference, and I'm looking forward to some really good presentations. And let's hope 2021 is kinder to us all. Thank you.
Thanks to Eva and Yara. Welcome to the Irish Grassland Association's Dairy Conference on the future-proofing of Irish dairy. First of all, to the podium, we welcome the Dairygold CEO, Jim Wolfe, on the industry perspective and can we sell our milk?
Okay, thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the introduction. And the topic that I'm addressing you today is, can we sell our milk as we look forward into the next decade? My presentation is going to look a little bit back because of where we've come from in this particular decade and the particular challenges that we've had as an industry in terms of dealing with the growth that we've had. And then I suppose taking a snapshot of where the dairy industry is today in terms of supply demand, moving into the challenges of consumer trends, and then what can we do about it as a farming community, as a dairy farming community in particular, and a few messages to take away. So, look, I'm CEO of Dairygold, so passionate really about the industry here in Munster, as it were. These are our locations, very favourable from a milk production perspective, as you can see, and you know, we pride ourselves on the basis of a grass-based system, particularly driven by the climatic impacts of the Gulf Stream. We are a dairy business primarily. 75% of revenue is generated from dairy activities, and obviously, you know, we're a business-to-business organisation where we have locations abroad in terms of dealing with our customers, selling ingredients to more than 50 countries globally, from bases in the UK where we have 2 factories, sales offices in Germany, Spain, and an office in Shanghai in China dealing with the Asian market. So in reality, every litre of milk that we handle in Dairygold is for export, is heading into a foreign land, is heading into a dairy deficit region by and large. So if we look back, and this is what we're going to do, is just look back to where we've come from, and particularly from 2009-2010 period, and you will have seen within the organisation, and we replicate the country really, you will see phenomenal growth. In milk volume terms, 70%, but not alone that, but because lactations have changed, longer lactations, people have been able to farm in a proper cycle, as it were, from a milk production perspective, you know, going up to over 300 days, the solids have moved actually far ahead of the milk volume. So, you know, in the year just ended, our solids will be in the order of 420 fat, 360 protein, something that we wouldn't have even envisaged 10, 15 years ago in the context of where we were at that particular point in time with shorter lactations. So it's about the solids, it's about what we do with that, that's what the revenue is generated in. It is not about the 87% water that is in the milk. So from that perspective, you know, serious volume to deal with, and has meant an awful lot of challenges within the business for our members, for ourselves as an organisation, in making sure that we were able to cope with that. So in looking at that, the landscape in 2012-13 was very different. It was a concerning landscape at the time, because the big challenge we had was that, you know, we wanted to do what was right by our members. We wanted to do what was right on the basis of cheap milk production from grass. Could we deal with that growth that was anticipated at that time, and what had we to do to enable that happen at farm level? And I suppose the reality is that the decision taken, which was on the basis of investing to ensure that our milk profile remained and was driven by a grass-fed production system. So it meant that we had to invest to deal with the grass growth profile, as it were, where we had to move our volume from in the order of about 28, 29 million litres at peak week, which would be in week 20 in May, to putting in capacity, which now stands at 52 million litres at peak week. So that enabled us to, if you like, deal with milk from grass for our members, and that was our, if you like, strategy and our plan at that point in time. What it meant from the point of view was that we are dealing with a product portfolio which is commodity. As I mentioned earlier, we're a business-to-business organisation, not in the home market, not in the domestic market. And our product portfolio is broken down in 42% in cheese, casein butter 24%, powders, well, whole milk powders 17%, and others then would make up the other 17%. Interestingly, when you're involved in cheese in a very significant way, and in casein, you have whey to deal with. So of the liquid milk that comes into us, in the context of those two particular products, 66% generates whey, and that is a very significant volumetric for secondary processing. So that's the challenge that we've had. We've had a huge amount in the context of investments. You've seen Mallow Nutritional Campus, which was completely a regenerated site, which has gone from 4 or 5 million litres capacity per week in 2014 to 21 million litres capacity now, and that's a whole nutritional campus in relation to powders. We've just recently concluded the project with our partners from Norway, Tina, for the Jarlsberg cheese factory in Mogilev, and again that is cheese for export for the non-British market, as it were, and that project was commissioned or commenced in 2016 and came to fruition in 2020. We've had the whole issue around whey processing that I've referred to, and then we've had the cheddar cheese expansion in Clonmel Road in Mitchelstown. So the reality is that there's more than 425 million invested in capital by both Dairygold members and our partners right through the period of 2012 to 2020. So phenomenal investment to deal with that milk to ensure that it came from grass. No different to the rest of the industry and no different to every purchaser and processor of milk. You know, we have now dealt with the volume, so now what do we do in the context of getting into the steady state? Well, first of all is to understand what our members are thinking, and we completed a milk census in 2020, January to March period, a one-to-one milk census, which was phenomenally important because it gave us the plan and the thought process right out to 2025 and beyond. And interestingly, the growth rate out ahead is much more modest. And you know, when we looked at it and ran the numbers and extrapolated out to find the years of 24, 25, 26, it looks like about 2.6% compound or annual growth rate. And we can deal with that. So the capacity is in place to deal with that right now. And in fact, this year just ended, our milk volume in a good year on grass will be up by 2.5% just. So, you know, we're getting into what I would call steady state. And good from the farmer perspective in the context of the capital programs and the capital intensity has been dealt with. So like the rest of the industry, it's now about adding value to that milk. Where we are right now is that the capital program is complete. So the issue is in looking ahead now in the context of dealing with the milk volume. Of course, the whole issue now is about adding value to the litre of milk. The theme we have today is about, can we sell our milk? And I'd be very positive at this point in time and say, yes, we can. We have seen phenomenal growth in our Irish industry from 5.5 billion litres in 2014 to what is just 8 billion litres at this stage. So there's no issue around that. I suppose the expectation for all of us, even in a manufacturing grass-based system, is we've dealt with the volume, now can we add value to it? So the whole issue, and then we're within the organisation responding to market changes and trends. Health and nutrition is the space that we see in particular where we can do that. fortified milk, convenience foods and so on. So if we look then at the task of can we sell going forward, and I think the few things that we must look at is while global milk production is about 850 million tonnes annually, 82% of it is consumed within its geographic region of production. So the reality is that the trade and the price and all that is really established on the basis of about 150 million tonnes that's traded internationally. And that's the important thing here in the context of this. Not all milk is traded globally across borders. So this is the piece that's really important to know what's happening in that space, in what products, for what markets. And I suppose the challenges that we look at then that we're faced with constantly is the whole issue around right now, we're coming out of the COVID period, we have Brexit, we have climate change, and we have other global forces. And if we just deal with them on a one-by-one basis, COVID, as far as I would see, is dealt with really. We're working through, we're getting to the vaccination stage. We'll be looking back on this in 5 or 6 months' time and say, yes, that was then and this is now. Brexit, on the other hand, is a complicated piece of work. It's a complication from the point of view that there is nothing good about it from a milk processor point of view, from a milk producer point of view. It's adding costs to the supply chain. And all one can do is be as prepared as one can for every eventuality. But look, we can't let it worry us at this point in time. It has to be dealt with. Climate change, on the other hand, while it is really going to be the issue of the future and the challenge that has to be addressed and embraced, the whole issue on carbon emissions, ammonia, water quality and biodiversity. I'll be coming to them again. And then we have, of course, the global forces, the whole issue of political uncertainty, economic stability. If we were looking back 5 or 6 years ago, it was more about free trade, removal of barriers. The world was looking at a place that, where markets and opportunities could be explored, and it was about, making it happen. In fact, we've become more parochial or nationalistic in our approach in what has happened in the Brexit situation, what has happened in the US situation in particular. So that political uncertainty and tariff wars and tariffs being imposed, even in the Irish dairy industry currently, for products going to the US having to pay a 25% tariff. Some have negotiated it successfully in the likes of Kerrygold by Ornua, others not as easy. And there are other global forces that are at play. So these, if you like, I would describe as clouds that we have to work under and we have to cope with. And then, of course, the topic then is the supply-demand scenario. What is that like right now? What is that like out ahead? Well, I don't have a crystal ball to tell you what's going to happen in 2, 3, 4 years' time. But I suppose we can look back and say, well, how have we coped in the current year, whenever all of these things have been thrown at us, as it were? And what's really interesting in the context is that milk supply has got into a more steady state of between 1 to 1.5%. What's interesting in the context of this global milk supply pattern is that we've seen, and I'm not going to go into every figure here, but you can see the US flows have been strong. It has been a topsy-turvy year, but the run rate at the moment is about plus 2.5%. The UK started out poorly and has recovered and is now about 1.8%. And Europe as a whole is about 1%. But the phenomenal thing about this particular slide is that if we look at the southern hemisphere, are all on the upward movement again, and they haven't been. And I suppose that's the important thing just to note there. In the overall context, plus 1.7%. Within the EU, what's significant and what the trend is, it is the smaller countries that are actually growing now. You're getting steady state from the big four, really, if you take the Dutch, the Germans, the French, and the UK to a lesser extent. They're getting into a more steady state. So it's the Polands of this world, it's the Irish, and a few other of the small countries that are actually growing right now. And that's growing in milk supply. When we then look at the demand side of the equation, and according to Snapshot at that, and what we will see here is that the demand is running at about 1%. But there's a little bit of a story behind this, because when you look at the figures, you'll get a mixed indicators from that slide, like butter consumption in North America is down, South America trade is back significantly, EU is down, and so on. But this year gone by has been a year like no other. And in fact, consumption has dropped, but demand has increased. And that is all because of the COVID, if you like, overhang of the market, where we've seen the food service side decimated from February, March onwards, and we've seen the retail side pick up significantly and get into more traditional type of trade that we would have been more accustomed to 20 years ago. And what has brought about the actual demand increase is the moving from what has been a kind of just-in-time type of inventory management system of the past to building stock and giving an insurance buffer right through now in the event of second and third waves and so on. So that the demand side has led to a scenario of safety first, keeping extra product just in case. And it was a phenomenon that we experienced very much during the summer period of 2020, when we got the wave. The second wave was being predicted for Asia and for Europe, and we saw stock demand pull was good at that point in time. So what the scenario really at this point in time is that we're almost in what I would describe as the market is almost in balance, but the story behind it is a little bit more detailed than that. So if we look at that, we've come through all the particular challenges of COVID. So if we look then at the global dynamics and what's happening, and I suppose the first thing to say is population growth. I mean, we have to feed our people. And the population, you know, this year gone by at 2020 was about 7.8 billion and forecasted to be 9.8 billion by 2050. So that's very important, because that's one of the fundamental underpinning of demand. We look at urbanization, you know, hugely trend towards urbanization right across the globe, but in particular in the dairy deficit regions. Half of the mega cities in the world will be in Asia by 2040. So that's really significant, because that again is dairy deficit region. We have a growing middle class. And again, you know, you go from the poverty to the middle class to the affluence, and the middle class are the consumers. And we look then at the income, and all that is indicating positive income based on OECD figures right out here. And that is even to the geographies that have dairy deficit, that the income per capita is still in growth. We have the westernization of eating habits, you know, looking at downtown Shanghai, and you have your McDonald's logo hanging out there. So you have that trend towards westernization of eating habits, which leads to dairy proteins, animal proteins, and so on. And as well as that, you have a growing population, growing older population. And again, at both beginning of life and end of life, dairy and dairy ingredients are really important in the context of the health of the individual. So all of those indications are really positive. Because, you know, there is a finite amount of land, there's a finite amount of dairy opportunity, and you'd have to say, without putting numbers on it, that the underlying trend out ahead is positive from a dairy perspective. Not without its challenges, though, and when we look at challenges, and we look in particular at consumer trends, and from a global point of view, and this is just an assembly of 10 bullet points that people talk about in the context of diet, and in particular the 18 to 26-year-old category, you know, the issue around dairy-free, permissions to indulge, digestive wellness, right down along to down with sugar and hello savoury and say cheese and so on. So there is a greater consciousness of health and wellness, and that's driving a particular trend of fresh, natural, healthy aging and so on. As an industry and as a processor, you know, that's why we talk about health and nutrition. That particular space is so important going forward, so that you can build dairy into the expectation of the consumer, and that's very significant as we look ahead. So while we'll have the population growth, we will have greater amount of dairy. This will not, it will impact, but will not seriously disrupt the level of demand from a dairy perspective. So if we look then at you, the audience today, in the context of milk producers, efficient milk producers from grass by and large, in what we in our organisation have very much bought into in the context of our investment, the whole issue around grass-fed standards and how can we capitalise on what you're doing. And a work in progress at the moment, and I stress it's a work in progress, is this whole national grass-fed standard, INAB accredited, and it's really important that it is accredited. And that is the whole issue in terms of being able to say, I'm producing from grass, it is an important virtue, as it were, and I'm able to be certified that I'm producing from grass. And if you look in the context of the right-hand side of that slide, and you take Kerrygold, for example, you know, that butter and the success of that brand in the US is underpinned, and really underpinned, on the basis that it's milk from grass, the cream from that milk, giving it the colour, giving it the texture, and the naturalness. That's so important. You know, in our own case, in our own statistics, that the average days at grass are 250 days in the Dairygold area. 95% of what's consumed is pasture-based diet. That's either as green material, as grazed, or conserved grass. And that's happening right across our 2,700 milk producers in the analysis that we've done. So there's some statistics here that are important. And all I'm saying is, you know, there's much debate about this issue about grass-fed and certification and all that. As an exporting nation, we should really cut down to the chase and sell our materials and what we produce and export them and enhance them in whatever way we have and whatever advantages we have. And we have really a fundamental advantage on the basis that the bulk of our dairy products are coming from a grass-based system, and that is what is needed in the context of the market, and what the market expects and resonates so well with both customers and consumers. So more of that, and we need that to be embraced. I think from a producer's point of view as well, what's important is we do need to enhance our reputation. You know, what I would say to producers, you know, you must operate in the sustainable farming practices. I mean, the license now to produce, the focus is on what you're doing from the point of view of sustainability. The issue around welfare has been debated very much in the past number of years, and excellence in all aspects of animal welfare. You know, get the certification from a grass-fed perspective. The issue around carbon reduction, water quality improvement, biodiversity, and the whole issue around antimicrobial resistance and corrective measures on that. You know, if you were looking at it and if you were advising somebody in the milk production business or getting into milk today, that this is going to be your license to produce, tick these boxes and then deal with the rest later, because that's going to be the controlling factor, and that's going to be the issue that you're going to be called out on if you're not going in the right curve as far as these aspects are concerned. These are fundamentally important in the context of engaging in what is a fine market. Think of the 150 million tonnes of dairy that has to be traded. Think of the customers that are there. What is their ask? Their ask will be is, you know, is there going to be any case of embarrassment in any shape or fashion from the point of view of issues around farming practice, animal welfare, or whatever, and are we now tackling the issues around carbon reduction, water quality, biodiversity, and so on? So much so that we take this seriously on the basis that where we once had a milk quota on the milk statement, we now have the carbon number for every producer. So that the focus is on that. And what we want to do is to get a 40% reduction in that carbon number by 2030. And we're setting out plans for that, because I think that's really going to be the license to improve, to produce for the future. And we've seen the issues around water quality recently in the context of various EPA reports and so on and so forth. So the advice would be is, it's not about selling, it's about making sure that we're ready for selling and that we're compliant in what the market expects. So in summary then, you know, I believe that in adopting these practices, that Ireland can be the safest, the most secure, the most compliant source of natural dairy. Our competitors in the Southern Hemisphere, they're all getting their act together. Be very clear here. They're all embracing these practices. We have come from a situation where we're growing rapidly, we have grown, we're now in steady state, and it is now about making sure that we can, if you like, enable not alone to just sell the milk, but to add the maximum price and to be able to participate in the markets that give the greatest return. So, in takeaways, you know, it's a great time to be looking back on the decade, because we've described it as a dairy industry renaissance, where plant, equipment, processing facilities have been regenerated, where farmers have invested their money on the basis of the future. And that has been hugely demonstrated by the financial support that has come about from members in the context of making those investments. We have one of the most sustainable dairy producing regions globally. Important to note that milk will continue to grow, but at a slower pace, and dairy demand will continue equally to grow, and that's really the importance of that. The volatility will continue, because in any market, in any traded commodity across borders, where you have that 150 million tonnes that we speak about, you know, the supply demand will influence price. I have no doubt about that. And there are protection measures in there for those who can and should avail, is on the basis of the fixed price schemes and so on, to take out that volatility and its impact on your monthly income. So what I would say to you is current challenges are being addressed with confidence and optimism by the industry, and that's, I can say that with certainty. And put simply, we can sell our milk, and there's a bright future for sustainable farming. So, Chairman, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to address your membership today.
Thanks, Jim, for a great, confident presentation on can we sell our milk. I just want to put in one question to you, Jim, and it's to start off, it's what has kept that price of milk so firm in 2020?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because it has been such an unusual year, 2020, with COVID in the middle of March, and when we were facing Armageddon, as we saw it at that point in time. And the early days, the market did, you know, melt, you know, in March, April, but quickly actually turned around into April, into May, June, and July, and you would have seen price increases occurring at that time. Because just think of what happened. You had what happened in Wuhan right into March, into April. You know, your Chinese ceasing imports, the ports were clogged up, the challenge in getting reefers to move products and all of that type of thing. But what happened then was, of course, in anticipation of further cycles of COVID, the markets and the customers began to build up stock, because they were fearful of a repeating scenario. So consumption actually is back, as I referred to, but actually the demand has been in stock build and security of supply to carry people over. And maybe that's a phenomenon that might last for a while, actually. So it's having, as described in the trade, it's gone from being just in time to just in case.
And you spoke about that consumption declining, but the increasing demand. And grass-fed is a huge benefit to our membership in the Grassland Association, but it's also a great benefit to the farmers from a cost perspective. How can milk processors really deliver on a brand and around the grass-fed message?
Yeah, I think first of all is the advantage you've had from you're producing it as cheaply as possible and so on, and you know that has put a burden in the industry from a cost point of view, and that has been a cost that's worth bearing. If you look in the context of in the pecking order, you know, organic was a fashionable route for a period of time and still is for certain sector, but grass-fed actually is more attractive. Now, what are we doing about getting that grass-fed message across? Our key customers in the whole infant formula sector and other of the major international players are really looking at, can we verify and can we certify that it's grass-fed, and that people understand the accredited aspect of it, and accreditation is what we're seeking at the moment. And I think we've nothing to fear from in that space. I think all the work that's been done, that we fit that category, but we must get our act together as a nation in that regard, and whatever is produced from an Irish point of view, it is produced from grass and that we're able to have it in verified, if you like. And that's very important.
You mentioned about Ireland being the safest, most secure, most compliant source of natural dairy. How receptive and how important is that message when it comes to selling to your customers?
Yeah, I think the whole issue around trust is really important. You know, the trust and the credibility as producers, as processors, as, you know, getting into that marketplace. We've seen where trust breaks down and what has broken down in the past. We've seen the various things like melamine and all that has happened in Asia and the impact there. It destroys a market, it destroys your business. There's a very fine line. There's about 150 million tonnes that's traded internationally. We are 8 million tonnes of that. Now, we're competing out in the marketplace. So we cannot have any taint or any question about our bona fides. So embracing the issues around sustainability, embracing the issues around carbon, water quality, air emissions, and right down to how you actually manage and practice in relation to antimicrobial resistance and the techniques you use of drying off and all that. These are things that are really important, that we actually put them on our badge of honour as a virtue, rather than as a saying that we must reluctantly deal with. If we deal with them properly, and deal with them, you know, in the way we've always dealt with things in the past in the Irish industry, because it's a progressive industry, then that will be a mark of differentiation in the marketplace. And I believe that we will be safe, secure and compliant. We should be one of the best places in the world to produce milk and to be a source of dairy for a discerning market.
And finally, Jim, Dairygold and the Co-ops of Ireland have made a huge contribution to rural development. How do you see this partnership developing and continuing into the future?
That's a very good point, Laurence, because I mean, you know, we're involved. We're a multi-purpose co-op, so you know we have members who are in beef and tillage and other enterprises. But when we do look at the level of activity and level of organisation, the dairy side is where all the action is, by and large, right through. And a statistic I'll give you is for 2020, you know, we have 2,700 milk producers. We will have sent out via check in or PayPat into the bank accounts of those 2,700 producers, 510 million euro. That's going out, you know, on a month, you know, right throughout the year, putting cash flow into those communities, into the parishes. And there's no better way than to keep the life going. In fact, you would question what would be without the farming, dairy farming community in rural Ireland, what would it look like? I think the backbone is dairying, you know, and the level of enterprise and the growth that has taken place has underpinned the future of rural Ireland because you've gone from being an average size family farm to almost, in many cases, an SME, a small and medium enterprise.
Jim Wolfe, the Chief Executive of Dairygold, on behalf of the Grassland Association, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
And thank you, Jim. And next to the podium is Dr. Deirdre Hennessy. With the researcher's perspective, can herbage production be maintained on lower N?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So the title of my presentation is, Can herbage production be maintained at lower chemical nitrogen input? As we know, dairy farming is facing many ongoing and future challenges, including the Green Deal target of reducing nitrogen fertiliser input by 20%. We also have the renegotiation of the nitrates derogation this year, and there are targets to be met in terms of water quality and greenhouse gas emissions. And within all that, we have to be conscious of the image of farming and our social licence to farm. So in terms of that 20% target for reduction in fertiliser use, what would happen if we did reduce chemical nitrogen fertiliser by 20%? In November 2020, Teagasc released a report where they looked at the predicted effect of a 20% reduction in chemical nitrogen fertiliser from 250 kilos of nitrogen per hectare to 200 kilos of nitrogen per hectare at 3 stocking rates, so 2.5, 2.75 and 3 cows per hectare. So we can see immediately that as soon as nitrogen fertiliser is reduced, herbage production is reduced. And ultimately what this results in is an increase in the feed deficit on the farm. So we move from a feed deficit of about a half a tonne of dry matter at 2.5 cows per hectare up to a deficit of 2.2 tonnes at a stocking rate of 3 cows per hectare, which is a significant deficit. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, if we have an increased feed deficit that has to be dealt with, how do we deal with it? It could be by reducing stocking rate or by increasing purchased feed, but ultimately we're going to have to increase our focus on nitrogen use on our farms. So how do we fill that gap if chemical nitrogen fertiliser is reduced? And I suppose this is the theme that I want to deal with for the rest of the presentation. So firstly, we'll have a quick look at farm gate nitrogen use efficiency. So this is the nitrogen use efficiency within the farm gate. Okay, so we have inputs of nitrogen entering the farm in the form of fertiliser, concentrate and stock. Some of this cycles through it all cycles through the farm, but some of it then leaves the farm in terms of in product. So nitrogen leaves the farm in the form of milk and in live weight, be it cull cows or calves or surplus stock sold. Okay, so then that nitrogen use efficiency is the efficiency with which we use that nitrogen entering the farm in terms of converting it into product leaving the farm. And the industry target for nitrogen use efficiency is 35%. So where are we at the moment? So on this slide here, I'm showing the national average nitrogen use efficiency for 2019 based on National Farm Survey data. So the average dairy farm is stocked at 2.11 cows per hectare, or livestock units per hectare. Concentrate use is 1,144 kilos per cow, and fertiliser applied is 177 kilos per hectare. The national average farm is growing about 10.5 tonnes of dry matter per hectare and producing about 900 kilos of milk solids. Okay, this is resulting in a nitrogen surplus of 176 kilos of nitrogen per hectare and a nitrogen use efficiency of 24%. So basically 24% of the nitrogen entering the system is being sold in product. Okay, so in terms of research, where are we? So the two columns to the right are showing the nitrogen use efficiency at Moore Park. Firstly, on a grass-only system, getting 250 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, and then a grass clover system getting 150 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. Both of these systems are stocked at the same stocking rate, which is 2.6 cows per hectare, receiving the same quantity of concentrate of 367 kilos per cow, and they're growing similar quantities of herbage, which is 13.6 tonnes of dry matter per hectare. Okay, so the grass-only treatment is receiving 229 kilos of nitrogen across the year, while the grass clover was getting 156 kilos of nitrogen across the year. In terms of milk solids sold, on a per hectare basis for the grass-only, it was 1,261 and 1,339 for the grass clover. Okay, and all this results in a lower nitrogen surplus per hectare compared to the national average. And a greater nitrogen use efficiency. So the nitrogen use efficiency for the grass only is 40%, and for the clover 150 it's up to 58%. Now bear in mind I said this is a farm gate nitrogen balance, so we're not taking into account the nitrogen fixed by clover on the clover treatment. So the increase in nitrogen use efficiency there is coming from reduced fertiliser input and increased milk solids sold. So there are two main areas that you can focus on your farm to make better use of the nitrogen that's available. So the two areas are nutrient management and white clover contribution on farm. So looking at nutrient management first. So the first thing we need to consider is making better use of slurry that's available on the farm. So we know, but there's no harm in recapping, that there is differences in terms of nitrogen availability based on the method used to apply the slurry. So with splash plate, the average availability is around 46%, and that increases to 65% when low emission slurry spreading techniques such as trailing shoe are used. So what does this mean, I suppose, in terms of the slurry you apply? So on the available nitrogen per 1,000 gallons of cattle slurry, if we apply slurry using splash plate, is about 6 kilos of available nitrogen in spring and 3 kilos available in the summer. But once we use less, that increases to 9 kilos in spring and 6 kilos in summer. Okay, so the big message here is, if you can, it's better to use slurry in spring before summer to get the best use of the nitrogen in that slurry. So then, okay, we know we should apply it in spring and using less if we can. So how do we plan that slurry use? So if we apply 2,500 gallons of slurry per acre in the spring, that's the equivalent of about 23 kilos of nitrogen per hectare if we use something like a trailing shoe. So we can potentially replace nitrogen fertilizer on up to 2/3 of the milking platform by applying slurry in January, February time to the third of the farm with the lowest covers, and in February and March to the first third of the milking platform that was grazed. And overall, across the milking platform, that's a potential reduction in the requirement for nitrogen fertilizer of about 15 kilos. Okay, then looking at slurry ground, which is the other main place where we use slurry. So again, if we use 2,500 gallons per acre, depending on when we apply it, this is going to give us a saving of about 15 to 20 kilos of nitrogen when we apply using less. But it's important here to remember that there is nitrogen in that slurry, so we should reduce nitrogen fertilizer accordingly. Okay, and the big take-home message in terms of slurry really is, if you're spreading your slurry by less, you should be spending less on fertilizer. Okay, moving on to mid-season management. And before I start to talk about mid-season management, it's really important to be aware that what I'm talking about is in the context of having optimum soil fertility. So having your P and K at index 3 and your pH over 6.3. Okay, so the first thing you need to consider is soil mineralization. So what is soil mineralization? Basically, soil mineralization is the background nitrogen that is released from the soil. And this is that nitrogen is held in the organic matter in the soil. It's not readily available for plant growth, but through mineralization process, that nitrogen is made available for plant growth. And what it requires is high temperature. So we generally see soil mineralization increases as soil temperature increases. But some moisture is also necessary. If we don't have moisture, we won't have mineralization. So if you think back to the drought in 2018, there wasn't much mineralization going on during the summer when it was very dry and warm, but as soon as we got rainfall in August, September, we saw a flush of nitrogen released from the soil. On average, in most years, we have somewhere between 180 and 240 kilos of nitrogen per hectare released from the soil. And a lot of that, and most of that, in fact, is released in the summer. So it's important to bear that in mind. In terms of planning summer nitrogen application, so how do you go about that? Well, the first thing you have to do is measure the grass on your farm. You need to know how much grass is on the farm. So you need to walk the farm weekly or twice weekly if grass growth is very fast. You need to record your covers and put them into something like pasture base, and then look at your grass wedge. And you need to use all the information that is available. So you'll know your current farm cover and your grass wedge from pasture base, but you should also make use of the information that's available from the most grass growth model, which is a prediction of grass growth. This has been available through Teagasc since the start of 2020 and will continue into 2021. It's available weekly in the Grass 10 newsletter, but it's also available on the farming forecast on a Sunday after the 1 o'clock news on RTE1. Okay, so in terms of the predicted grass growth, so this graph here shows you in black the average grass growth across the country in 2020 from Pasture Base Ireland. And the red broken line is the predicted grass growth across the country using the most grass growth model. And you can see there's a very close relationship between the predicted and the actual. And the important thing to take from the grass growth predictions is not the absolute figure, because that's going to vary farm to farm, but it's the trend. So is the trend continuing to increase, or is it starting to decrease, or is it about the same as it was last week? So then using the information that you have, you can make some decisions around developing your mid-season nitrogen fertiliser plan. So firstly, how much grass do you need? What's the demand on the farm? How much grass is on the farm? That information you'll have from pasture base based on your farm covers. What growth is predicted, which you can get from either the farming forecast or the Grass 10 newsletter. Then the next thing is, if there is slurry left over on the farm, consider using that and applying it using less. Then be aware of the weather and the growing conditions. Are conditions conducive to growth, or, for example, is there a drought? Other things to think about, you should consider calibrating your fertiliser spinner, because you know, if you don't calibrate it, you're not sure if you're accurately applying the quantity of fertiliser you want to apply. The other thing is, consider using GPS for slurry, for fertiliser spreading. The reason for using GPS is it will avoid overlapping. Okay. Finally, this is, I suppose, something that we can all probably think about straight away. Are you making surplus bales in every rotation on your farm? If you're making more surplus bales than you require to fill gaps in the spring or the autumn, then you probably have too much nitrogen in the system, and there's a good opportunity here to reduce some of the nitrogen fertiliser that's being applied in the mid-season. Okay, so the next area then is white clover. So I've put together here a table showing the results from the Moore Park grass only, getting 250 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, compared to the grass white clover getting 150 kilos of nitrogen, systems that we've had in place for the last 8 years. Both systems are run at the same stocking rate. They have similar annual annual herbage production at about 13.5 tonnes of dry matter per hectare. Silage conserved is similar. The quantity of silage fed during lactation is slightly higher on the white clover treatment, and a lot of that extra silage is actually fed in the autumn rather than in the spring, but again, it's a small quantity. The average clover content over the last 8 years has been 22%, and we have in fact some of the swards in this system, about 50% of them are 8 years old, and about another 30% are 7 years old. The milk yield per cow and the milk solids yield per cow are greater for the grass white clover treatment by about 243 kilos for milk yield and 20 kilos for milk solids per cow. Concentrate fed per cow was similar across the two treatments, and as I mentioned already, nitrogen use efficiency was greater on the white clover compared to the grass only. So I suppose, you know, to summarise the main benefits of white clover from both the Moore Park research and our other research in Teagasc, we see increased herbage production when we include white clover in the sward, up to about 1.5 tonnes dry matter per hectare. We also see increased milk solids production at about 20 to 50 kilos of milk solids per cow. And we know that clover fixes nitrogen and makes it available for plant growth, and ultimately that means there is a reduced requirement for fertiliser nitrogen. We do need our swards to have about an average annual clover content of 20% if we're to get these benefits. So how do we maintain 20% clover in the sward? So here I have a graph showing the average sward white clover content at Clonakilty in the dark green line and Moore Park in the lighter green line over the last number of years. And you can see clover content increases across the year and it peaks in around September. So the first thing to say about managing white clover swards is that we're using the same grazing management targets as we use on grass-only swards. In the spring, you need to be conscious of achieving and hitting your spring targets and the targets in the spring rotation plan. Early nitrogen and slurry should be applied and minimise poaching as far as possible. In the mid-season, it's important not to build pre-grazing yield greater than 14 to 1600 kilos of dry matter, and it's important to achieve our 4 centimetre residuals. The April to July period is the ideal period for oversowing and reseeding clover into swards. And then finally, autumn management. We do need to build our rotation during the autumn as we do in grass swards. We need to hit our autumn targets so that we have grass available for grazing in the spring. And residuals are as important as in a grass-only sward. The swards need to be cleaned out to about 3.5 centimetres. So within this, I suppose, profile of growth across the year, this period here from about May to August offers us the opportunity to reduce fertiliser nitrogen. So how do you go about looking at reducing nitrogen fertiliser? So what I have on this slide here is a nitrogen fertiliser application strategy that we've used on the grass clover and the grass-only swards at Moore Park for the last 8 years. So the grass getting 250 kilos of nitrogen per hectare is in the yellow column, and the grass clover getting 150 kilos of nitrogen per hectare is in the blue column. And you can see nitrogen application is the same for the first 3 applications. And this is because if you think back to the previous slide, clover is making a small contribution to the sward in this part of the year. And we have a demand for grass and to feed our cows early in the spring, so we need to grow that grass. So the opportunity to reduce fertiliser comes in the second half of the year. And in this period, we can reduce the fertiliser applied by about 100 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. And we're taking advantage of the nitrogen fixing ability of the clover to supply nitrogen for growth. So we can see clearly that white clover presents a huge opportunity to reduce nitrogen fertiliser on our farms with no effect on herbage production. So how do you go about getting clover onto your sward? So I have 4 simple steps here, probably a little bit simplified, but they're here regardless. So firstly, you need to select the paddocks that you're going to either oversow or reseed, okay? You need to have the soil fertility right on those. If you're oversowing, you need swards with a high perennial ryegrass content and a low weed content. Select medium-leaved cultivars from the recommended list. Any of the medium-leaved cultivars will be suitable. Then oversow or reseed in the April, May, June period. The reason for this is the earlier in the year you reseed or oversow, the more grazing opportunities there are for the remainder of the year to help the clover to establish. And finally, post-sowing. In terms of grazing management, it's important to keep covers relatively low, so around 1,200 kilos if you can for a few rotations after sowing and for the rest of the year if possible. Graze down to 4 centimetres right throughout the rest of the grazing season, and reduce nitrogen, particularly for the first couple of rotations after sowing the clover, so that the grass doesn't dominate in the sward. Okay, so to summarise, I suppose the first thing to say is, bearing in mind that we're likely to see a reduction in nitrogen fertiliser that's allowed on our farms in the coming years, the first thing is, if you do nothing, your costs will increase, either through having to purchase extra feed or through reduced stocking rates. So you must be prepared to take some action. The first thing is that applying slurry with less and in spring before summer can reduce the amount of fertiliser that's applied by about 15 to 20 kilos per hectare. In the mid-season, you should measure and use all the available information to plan your nitrogen fertiliser strategy. And bear in mind, if you're making surplus bales in every rotation, there's definitely an opportunity for you on your farm to reduce some of that mid-season nitrogen. And consider white clover. White clover offers us a huge opportunity to reduce chemical nitrogen fertiliser by up to 40%. You know, that's twice the target in Green Deal. So, you know, that's not to be ignored. And our take-home messages. Firstly, while I didn't discuss this in detail, but it was mentioned on a number of occasions, you need to optimise soil fertility on your farm. Make it part of your plan for the year ahead. Make better use of the nitrogen that's available on your farm, be that through slurry, using less and applying in spring before summer. And also plan your mid-season nitrogen. And finally, consider reseeding and oversowing clover this year to allow reductions in nitrogen fertiliser in the summer and in future summers. Thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre, for showing us the pathways for maintaining our grass production whilst lowering our chemical input. My first question is on this reduction. It's going to be very hard to get farmers to buy into the fact that this 20% reduction in their nitrogen isn't going to result in them putting inputs in anywhere else. How do farmers achieve this reduction, but still by not filling it in with meal?
So thanks, Laurence. So I suppose the main thing farmers need to do is they need to measure their grass, because if they measure their grass, they can manage their short-term feed budgets better. They can see when surpluses and deficits are going to appear, rather than just feeding concentrate because they're worried there's going to be a shortage of feed. So the big thing that farmers need to do is measure grass on their farms. And the other thing is they need to start introducing clover. We've seen quite clearly that when we have clover in the sward, even with a reduction in nitrogen fertiliser, we don't have any negative impact on herbage supply or on milk solids production.
And in these clover swards, Deirdre, reducing in by 2/3 or by 1/3, can we convince farmers to do this?
I think we can, Laurence. I think the farmers who are good at managing grass, they will be able to incorporate their clover into their swards. They'll be able to keep that clover in the swards, and they will see that they can start to reduce nitrogen. So I suppose to give farmers confidence, look, we have the research, but farmers need to have confidence themselves on their own farm that it's going to work. So the first thing farmers can do is they can start to introduce clover on their farms. And once that clover is established, they can start to reduce nitrogen on some of their paddocks. And that will give them confidence on their own farm that they can reduce nitrogen.
Deirdre, you mentioned a strong focus on slurry in the spring, on the grazing block in particular. But is there a danger that this will result in a neglect of nutrients in the silage block?
Okay, Laurence, good question. So in planning your slurry, farmers need to be aware of the P and K requirements on their farms. So if you're making bales on your milking platform, there will be a requirement to replace some of the P and K. And ideally, those areas should be targeted early in the spring with slurry, okay? And after that, slurry should be planned for the areas of the silage ground that need P and K. Or alternatively, if more slurry goes onto the milking platform, no fertiliser P and K should be applied on those paddocks. It should instead be saved for the silage ground.
And finally, Deirdre, to finish, on largely non-clover farms in Ireland, if you had one step to choose in the spring and one step to choose in the summer, what steps would you take in 2021 to reduce nitrogen?
Okay, Laurence, so the first thing for the spring would be to plan your slurry. Plan where you're going to apply the slurry and use less to apply that slurry. And you also need to reduce the fertiliser nitrogen in relation to the slurry that's applied. In the summer, you're talking about non-clover farms. Those farms need to transition towards clover farms. So this year, start to oversow and reseed some clover onto those farms. And finally, measure grass, because measuring grass gives you confidence in the amount of grass that's on the farm. You know how much you need to feed the cows, and it gives you confidence then around reducing nitrogen on the farm.
Dr. Deirdre Hennessy, on behalf of the Irish Grasslands Association, thank you very much.
Thanks, Laurence.
Thank you, Deirdre. And now we welcome Tom O'Connell for the farmer's perspective on the spring to come, with his paper, Switched On for the Spring.
Thank you very much, Laurence. For those of you that don't know me, I'm from Inniscarra, in the Lee Valley near Cork City, dairy farming there with my wife Helen. And I'm going to talk to you today about switching on for the spring. We just have an overview here of I suppose what's happening on the farm in 2020, or what happened in 2020. We're farming 150 hectares, farm in total, 91 hectares of that is in the milking platform. We milked 318 crossbred cows. We had 91 1 to 2 year old replacements and 124 0 to 1s. We're carrying a lot of young stock because we have some young stock for another farm we're involved in as well, another dairy farm. The performance for 2020, we had 500 kgs of milk solids delivered per cow, and that equates to 1,750 kilos of milk solids. And the 6-week in calf rate was 90%, and we're on target to do that again this year. People in the business, there's myself and my wife Helen. We have 4 daughters. They're kind of ranging in ages from 9 to 15. There's Maria, Sarah, Eileen and Maria. And I suppose we've been very lucky. We have great people working on the farm. We have great staff. We have Daniel Lyons, who started working with us full-time in 2017. And we've Dan O'Mahony, who just came onto the farm this September. Dan is replacing Michael Miles, who had been on the farm for the previous 9 years. But Michael was from Poland, so he returned home for family reasons. We're also very lucky that we have some great part-time relief staff to cover for weekends and for time off. And this year in 2020, now we had 4 very good, capable people that were able to come on and fill in when they were needed. And we're also very lucky that we have good contractors that are very efficient and give a very good service in our area. Just a bit of background here on our farm, I suppose. Myself and Helen, we took over the farm from my parents back in 2002. At the time, we were milking 95 cows. We had a large cattle enterprise and we did some tillage as well. I suppose we are dairy gold suppliers, so I suppose the restricting factor back then for expansion in dairy was the milk quota. And I suppose the first step we made in expanding the dairy business was back in 2006 when we purchased some land and milk quota. In that year, we purchased about 20 dairy stock as well. And that brought us up to, we milked 140 then that year. And I suppose all the expansion that happened after that was by way of quota exchange and dairy gold. And any cows that were needed after that, we kind of were bred from within the herd, I suppose, really. This is just, I suppose, a run through the infrastructure on the milking platform. As you can see there, our farm is kind of split by a road, and it was in 3 different blocks. So I suppose up until that point, we would have been using the block A there would have been the grazing platform that was being predominantly used for milking cows, and B and C would have been used for silage and for tillage and for replacement heifers. I suppose a good bit of infrastructure had to be put in place, and in 2007 we upgraded all the roadways and the water in Block A. They all had to be widened and the water pipe increased. In 2010 we put in an underpass connecting Block A and Block B. And I suppose we upgraded and constructed roadways and upgraded the water in the water system in Block B then at that stage. And then in 2014, I suppose, with the end of quotas in sight, we put in a second underpass connecting the remainder of the land block together, and we put in further water and roadways back there then at that point. Now, over the years, a good bit of infrastructure has been put in place as well in the farmyard. I suppose it started there back in 2008. We put in additional slurry storage and about 40 additional cubicles. In 2009, then we had previously had a 12-unit jars plant, and we upgraded it and we put in a 20-unit swingover at the time. Then, in 2011, we did a kind of a major job in the yard. I suppose we could see the way the cow numbers were increasing, are going to be increasing in the future. So we put up new silage slabs and slurry storage and cubicles for 200 cows additional. 2016 then I suppose we had to revisit the milking parlour, and we installed a 36 unit rapid exit milking parlour then at that point. And 2017 we upgraded one of the old or one of our old sheds, and we put in an automatic calf feeder system for the heifer calves. And then finally in 2018 we put in additional storage and increased the size of our collection yard. So I suppose here on the slide we have just a picture here. We have a whiteboard inside in the staff room, I suppose, with a yearly planner on it, and it just makes it convenient, I suppose, for people booking holidays and working out cover and for weekends and for the year ahead. A 5-day week, I suppose we all know that dairy farms are not 5 days a week. They don't run themselves on weekends. Somebody has to come. But what has evolved on our farm over the years is, I suppose, weekends now are completely essential work only. So on Saturdays and Sundays, we just keep it to the very essential amount of work. So I suppose in the particularly during the winter time, all the feeding and the bedding and all that, and in the springtime, all that gets loaded up on a Friday, have everything done for the weekend to kind of minimise workload for the weekend. So I suppose the idea being that when people come in the morning time, they'll do the very essential jobs and it frees up the middle of the day. People are happy enough to come when they know they're only doing what the necessary amount of work, and that they get the rest of the day to do to pursue their own other interests. So I suppose, look, the reason for it is because it makes a better work-life balance for both ourselves and for people working on the farm. So by having Saturdays and Sundays essential work only, I think it just makes a better quality of life for everybody that's working on the farm, including ourselves, as I say. Adequate time off, look, helps, I suppose, people are more satisfied, hopefully, working with us when they have more adequate time off. And I suppose we need to be realistic in our expectations. I suppose the other thing is, I suppose we realise that people have lives outside of our farm. It's very important to us. We like to see people having other interests. And planning, I suppose, is key if you are to do this, because you're all the work that has to be done really between Monday and Friday, because it's only going to be the essentials that are going to be done at the weekend. Look, on the legislation, there's lots of legislation coming at us. Helen, my wife, has done a lot of work on trying to get us up to speed on legislation, and the hours is part of that. And I suppose like curtailing down the weekends to the essential helps in the hours as well for legislation. Weekly planning. Look, I suppose there's another big whiteboard inside the dairy with lots of jobs scribbled on it, I suppose, really. We have a whiteboard meeting every Monday morning, myself and Dan and Daniel. And it's nothing very official, really. It's about 5 or 10 minutes we spend just discussing. I suppose the first thing we'll do is we'll list out all the tasks that we feel need to be done. And we get them out of our heads and we put them up on the whiteboard. And sometimes that in its own right can, you might feel overburdened with the amount of work that you think needs to be done. But sometimes if you just put it up on the whiteboard, it may not actually be as onerous as what you thought you had. It might be more manageable looking. And I suppose we prioritise the jobs then. We go for the jobs that need to be done, the necessary jobs, we prioritise them. And the ones we'd like to get done, we'll do them if we get to them, but if we don't, we know that they can wait till the following week, I suppose. And when it comes to delegating the work then, look, everybody on the farm is capable of doing all the tasks on the farm. We like to keep it as simple as we can. But we like people to get different tasks to do, I suppose, to rotate around the workload so that everybody, I suppose, gets experience of doing different jobs, and it prevents monotony, I suppose, really. Just talking about preparing or planning for the spring, I suppose we start thinking about it in December. I mean, if I scroll back there, when we're looking at the calendar and holidays, and like our cows are due to calve, I think it's the 28th of January, and maybe some cows will calve before that, and you've 2 weeks of Christmas holidays, and you have days for other events. From the beginning of December, really, you want to be we find that you want to be planning and getting ready for the calving season, because it will come on you very quickly. So we like to have the calving sheds bedded and prepared before Christmas, just in case any early arrivals we're ready. It takes the pressure off, I suppose. The contractor, we use a contractor always for doing all the slurry and the fertiliser work up until April. And I suppose we contact them and let them know we want them and have them lined up for the spring is important. Come January, all the cows are vaccinated for rotavirus, and I suppose what we find is very important at that stage is to group together the cows that are going to calve first and have them in the cubicles. Have them in the cubicles closest to the calving area, so that when the time comes, it's the minimum amount of work needed to get them into the calving shed. And we have good facilities for drafting cows out of that cubicle shed into the calving area. I think this is something that's very important. It should be one-man job really to get the cows out of the cubicles into the calving area, and it should be a one-man job that is safe to do. Look, another thing I suppose in preparing is to have all your supplies ready and on the farm, you know, not to be caught short when the time comes. Just a little bit here on the calving shed system. A number of years ago there, we have 4 group pens, is what we have, 4 large group pens for calving. So what we did was we labelled them A, B, C and D. We just painted with a tin of paint. We painted A, B, C and D onto the walls in several places to identify the individual pens. And the way we record the calvings, I suppose, is we use a diary. And we simply write down the number of the cow, the sex of the calf, the breed of the calf, and the number of the calf, and where the cow and calf are they in pin A, B, C or D. And I suppose what we like about it is that when different people are coming on and off the farm, it makes it very simple for them to take on from, if they hadn't been there for the last 3 or 4 days or since last weekend, they can just pick up the diary and they'll know which cow calved in which pen. And when they're picking out the cows to send them over to the milking parlour, they just simply put a tick after the cow. And when all the cows that they need are gone across to the parlour, maybe draw a line across underneath the bottom cow. And any cow that calves later in the day can be recorded below that line then. So I think it just makes it very simple. Just to identify the cows to go to the parlour. The milking parlour system then is, again, we try and keep it as simple as we can. We have 2 groups. We milk the cows in 2 groups. We have a colostrum group, which we keep the ones that are to be kept out of the tank, and we have the ones that are able to go into the tank. So we stick with the 2 groups all the time during the springtime. Just on the milking parlour systems, I suppose, one thing that we've been implementing with the last number of years is only milking the cows once a day until 60% of the cows are calved. I think it just gives everybody on the farm a great opportunity to focus on the calving and on looking after the young calves. The fresh cows, we milk them first, so we'll bring them over into the milking parlour, and the first thing we'll do with those cows is we'll apply ankle straps to the cows. We have on the whiteboard, we have different colours ankle straps will be applied depending on which day of the week the cow calves. So if the cow calves on a Monday, she will get a red strap here, for example. So we find this a huge benefit as well with different people coming on and off the farm. It's simple. So if you're looking at the colostrum group and you just look at the cow's ankle, you know which day the cow calved. And then when it comes to the 6 days or whatever the withdrawal period is up, it's very easy to identify the cow 6 days ago, the Cullerford band just removed those ankle straps, and those cows then are ready to join the main herd. Now, our system then that we have in place for the newborn calves is, I suppose, what is hugely important, we feel, for herds of our size, is to have colostrum fed. It's the number one priority for us, I suppose, on the for the springtime. That the calves have to get the colostrum straight away. And the system we have in place here is that we feed the colostrum and we tag the calf at the same time. So once the calf has been fed the colostrum, he's tagged. So then I suppose if anybody else comes into the calving shed during the year, or during the day, sorry, they can easily identify if the calf has been fed. Because if there's a new calf there and he's no tag, he needs to get colostrum and he gets tagged. And if he has got tagged, he's already received his colostrum. So then the calves move from the calving area into small group pens, and they're trained in groups of 3 or 4 to the milk bar bucket. And then when they're competent at drinking, we move them into larger groups of 9. And they stay there in that shed then until they're about 6 days old. And then from there, they go for the heifer calves are taken to another shed where we have the automatic feeder, and the bull calves are taken and they're put in groups of 45 in bigger sheds where we use the 50 teat milk bar teat feeder. Observation then, the calving observation. At night, in the past, we have used night calvers if the option is available, but if it's not, I'm happy to do it myself because I'm confident that the other members of staff are well able to look after the place during the day, so they're not as dependent on me, I suppose. So, the other thing, I suppose, during the day, then Daniel and Dan will look after the calving, and I'll do it as well if as needed. And everybody in the farm has got the calving camera on their phone, myself and Helen and Daniel and Dan. So it's easy to keep an eye on the calving shed if we're doing other tasks. A little bit on the grazing system, maybe. Look, grazing in the springtime, it's something that we prioritise an awful lot on our farm. I think there's buy-in by everybody that we can all see the benefit to it. This past February now was one of the wettest Februaries on record, and I'd say we only missed 3 grazings during the month of February. But we are lucky, we have a good dry farm, we've got good grazing infrastructure, good roadways, and plenty of access points into the paddocks makes it easier. So I suppose what we do there is we always do a plan at the beginning of the week about the grazing. If we're block grazing and with conditions, I suppose we might sketch on the whiteboard on the map where the strip wires are going, and anyone on the farm then they're all capable of setting up the wires and letting out the cows. Another piece of technology that we've been using now a number of years is the bat latch and the automatic release timer for the gate handle, and we find it fantastic, especially in the springtime. I suppose when you let the cows out, if you have the bat latch set for 3 hours later, and if you get tied up in the yard at some other job or distracted, you know that the cows will be back inside in the cubicles after 3 to 4 hours. And we find this is absolutely essential to get the cows back in, that it's very rarely you'll damage the paddock seriously if you can get the cows in within 3 hours. And also the bat latch then for the remainder of the year, we just think it really helps to minimise lameness because the cows are wandering away in at their own time. Okay, what works on our farm, I suppose, and why it works. Look, I suppose we've good facilities and we are happy to invest in them, especially something that's going to help us out during the busy spring period is prioritised. Labour efficiency is a high priority for us. Look, I suppose what we'd like to do is every year, if we could come up with even one thing to make a labour saving or make life easier for us in the spring, we kind of set that target for ourselves, and you'd be hoping that over time you'll be making things easier all the time. We try and keep our systems clear and simple, that anybody that comes in and out, that it's straightforward to pick up without having to be overly explaining every time somebody new comes on the farm. I suppose communication between all involved is hugely important. It's a two-way thing. There are some great people working on our farm, and I think it's very important to be able to, to communicate well with them and to see what they have to offer. Stress-free work environment, I suppose, does make a place easier to work. It's look, I suppose no matter what way to go to work, a dairy farm is always going to be more stressful in the springtime. But I think it's very important as a farmer, or even for everybody working the farm, if you can just try and stay calm, usually, you'll work your way through things, and just being stressful doesn't help anybody else on the farm either, I think, And set work times, look, even during the spring, if people know they have the weekend off, and they know that they'll be home at a reasonable time at the weekend, I think it makes the spring all that much easier. So, switching to spring, guide and summary. I suppose what we are trying to learn on our farm is how we can best make the system as simple as possible. Simple systems is very important, I think. Purchasing time. Just don't be afraid to get in somebody else to do something you think you should be able to do yourself. And the use of contractors. I think it's very important to prioritise all these things for the spring and set yourself up for the rest of the year. Rest. Look, we're all guilty of it, I suppose, in January. Maybe we've all done it, taken on big contracts, maybe that runs into the start of calving. I suppose to be rested and ready is very important. Inventory, look, have all your medical supplies. There's enough going on in the spring, and there's plenty of time beforehand to have everything at hand, I suppose, is very important as well, to cut down on stress. Necessary work only. Look, even in springtime, I think it is possible to reduce the work down and to bare minimum for the weekend, and to allow people to go home for a few hours in the middle of the day. Good communication. Look, I suppose to sum up, neither myself or Helen or any of the lads working on the farm or any of the contractors, none of us are mind readers. So I think it's important to let other people know what you're thinking. And that's it, I think, for me. Any questions? Thank you very much for listening.
Well done, Tom. Great paper there on Switched On for the Spring. We just have a few questions. You have a great production at over 500 kilos of milk solids a cow, Tom. And you milk once a day until 60% of calves. How is this achieved?
Yeah, good question. Thanks, Laurence. I suppose, 60% of our cows will be calved, I suppose, in the first 3 weeks. So really, it's only the first cow that calved is kept out of the tank is milked once a day for 3 weeks. And we find that it doesn't have any impact on the annual production of the cows. Once you change over to twice a day after the first 3 weeks, it doesn't have no major impact, but it has a huge impact on managing the farm during the spring. It really, those are the 3 weeks when you'll be at your busiest, and just milking the cows in the morning, it's just made a massive difference on our farm.
You have a great respect for your labour, Tom, and you get their training right, you get the infrastructure right, and you reduce the stress in the yard. How did you come to this point with your staff?
I've learned as much from my staff, I suppose, as what they'll be hopefully learning from me. I suppose you have to be just open-minded and work with people, and I suppose be prepared to train yourself a bit as well. I mean, we have undertaken labour studies on our farm, and I've done labour management courses, and we've been part of the Dairy Gold Monitor Farm programme with labour management being the focus on our farm. So I suppose it's an area of interest we have, and I suppose when you see something working, you try and keep working on it and improving it as you go along.
And on that, you had this statement, get your ideas out of your head and onto a whiteboard. What brought you to that statement?
Well, I suppose My wife Helen is great for using the whiteboards, and I've learned a lot from her over the years. But I suppose in one respect, it probably I find it helps myself. If I have a lot going on inside my head, I like to write it down on a paper maybe, and maybe that's being reflected on the whiteboard. And maybe I just feel by getting this stuff up on the whiteboard, it kind of puts it all out there. And the problem is the workload is divided up amongst everybody else, and I don't think about it as much maybe.
Just a simple question now, on what time of day do you draft these nearest to calving cows?
Oh yeah, good question as well, Laurence. I suppose when the lads usually finish off in the spring before 5:30, the last thing they'll do before they go home is draft out any of the cows that are near calving and have them inside in the calving shed for the night. So then everything is set when they're leaving. Basically, the sheds are bedded and the cows near calving are inside. So.
And it is on the tip of every farmer's tongue watching this, and they're waiting for me to ask this question. What the hell colour is 2 gloves?
Very good question, Laurence. I suppose when we came up with this idea for ankle straps, we discovered that there's only 6 different colours available. So I think on one of the days we we actually use AI gloves. We tie 2 AI gloves around their ankle to replace, to come up with another alternative, I suppose, really. That's it, Laurence. Simple as that.
Tom O'Connell, on behalf of the Irish Grassland Association, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Laurence.
On behalf of the Irish Grassland Association, I'd like to thank Jim, Deirdre and Tom for their insights and presentations today. They've given us all the confidence and tools needed for dairy farming in 2021. I'd like to extend a big thank you to Yara, our main sponsor for the event, without whom any of this would be possible. I'd like to thank my Vice Chairman, Vinnie Griffith, Stuart Childs and Grania Hurley for all their work behind the scenes getting the papers together and presentations. I'd like to thank Laurence Sexton, who chaired today's events, Maura for all her work behind the scenes, and Teagasc Moore Park for use of their facilities for filming. And finally, all of us here from the Grassland Association wish you all the best for farming in 2021.